In previous classes, we have discussed the three major approaches of international relations or international politics: idealist approach, realist approach, and system approach. Now, in this class, we will discuss the last approach of international relations, and it is also the modern approach which developed mainly in the 1970-1980s, which is based on the idea of Karl Marx. Karl Marx analyzed that if we observe all the history, then we found that all the society are divided into two classes. One he called bourgeois and second he called proletariat. The bourgeois class exploit the proletariat class because he owned the means of production, and the society is based on exploitation, in which poor are exploited by rich, and this system should be changed through revolution. Or he suggested a proletariat revolution to abolish this system which is based on exploitation. And Karl Marx also observed that all the systems which are developed by the bourgeois class, such as state, such as economic system or political system, all are developed by the bourgeois class, which is exploiter, in such a way that they can maintain their exploitation without any objection from poor classes or without any objection from exploiter. So these are the basic ideas of Karl Marx. His theory was based on economic based or superstructure, or the infra or the base or the superstructure. He mentioned the base as the mode of production, and he also explained that with the change in the base, which is the mode of production, all the other systems are also changed according to this change in the base. And he called the economic system, political system, cultural system, or international system, all are the superstructure. So this idea of Karl Marx were further refined by many other thinkers, for example Lenin, Mao, and mainly the Antonio Gramsci. And based on the ideas of Antonio Gramsci, Robert Cox developed the critical theory, which is also called the Marxist theory, to analyze the international relations. So in this video we will discuss in the thinking way, in this way, this approach analyze the behavior of nations or analyze the international system. All the theory as this approach also states that all the theory are status quo. They explain what it is, but the Marxist theory suggests the changes, because this system is not a equitable basis, but it is based on a hierarchy, or it is based on exploitation, and this system, the international system, should be changed. So this is a theory suggests for a radical change in the existing system. This theory is based on the philosophy of Karl Marx, which I have told you that Marx ideas is the society is divided into two categories. On this term, on the basis of this idea, this theory also called that it also explained that the international system is divided into two categories. On the one side there are capitalist developed nation, and on the other side is the poor or developing nations. And like in the society where bourgeois class exploited the proletariat class, at international level also the developed country exploit the developing country. This is the base, or this is the basic ideas of a Marxist approach in international relation. Like society, nations are divided into two categories: developed capitalist nation and poor developing nations. In the existing system, rich and powerful nations, which are the capitalist nations, exploiting the poor or developing nations. So the system is based on exploitation. It is not status quo. This approach did not suggest or did not favor and don't favor the status quo, or that is the existing system should be continued, but it suggests that this system should be changed, but stand for the radical change of the existing international world order. This world order in which all the institutions, for example World Bank or WTO or IMF, all the international system are favor the developed nations. This system should be changed. This system should be transformed in more equitable system. Existing international system is based on exploitation, which must be changed into equitable system in which all the nations should be equally developed. For example, Marxist approach is also suggest the revolution at a national level or the social level to bring equality in society. In such manner, it want to bring equality among nations at international level. The Lenin book in this which also observed the exploitation of a poor nations by developing country, imperialism the highest stage of capitalism. Because Marx says that in the capitalism is the highest stage of the material development, because it start from the old communism or the ancient stage, after that is developed in the feudal state, and this now is developed in the capitalist stage. It is the last stage, and in this stage the proletariat will challenge the existing system, or they will bring a revolution against the bourgeois class. So, but Lenin said that the new development which Marx cannot be foresight, or which Marx cannot be imagined, that is imperialism. Through this system, the imperialist nation improve the condition of their own citizens on the cost of the developing nations, because they establish their colonies, because they control the economy or control the political system of the poor nation through the imperialism, and exploit them, exploit their natural resources, exploit their people, and through this they become very rich. The imperialist nation became rich, and the colonies which were exploited became very backward and poor. So this is the imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, and in the imperialism the poor nation should unite, or should be united against the capitalism or against the imperialism, and it should be abolished. But the new system, the new stage of imperialism also developed, which we called because imperialism is also called colonialism, and the new stage which Kwame Nkrumah stated that the neo-colonialism, which we will discuss in the later part of this video. The various theory of Marxist approach in international relation, there are two theories we will discuss, mainly the dependency theory or the critical theory. Critical theory developed by mainly Robert Cox and Andrew Linklater. And the dependency theory is Kwame Nkrumah or Samir Amin or Andre Gunder Frank. Many others thinkers are related to this dependency theory. But we will discuss the Marxist approach through these two theory, dependency and critical theory. What dependency theory says? Dependency theory says that the main assumption or main explanation or main features of dependency theories are that existing capitalist world system is based on exploitation of poor nations. Poor nations are exploited through neocolonialism, globalization, or all the system which are existing in this capitalist system, such as the international organization, WTO, World Bank, IMF, or all other the political institutions such as UNO also are dominated by the capitalist nation or developed nation, because we can observe that the European nations or the America has their hold on these institutions, and all that institutions are working in the favor of that nations. All the decisions are taken in the favor of that nation, because they have high say in that institution, which may be economic or which may be political. The international economic organizations are working in the favor of capitalist nations. For example, I have discussed that the World Bank, World IMF, or all the institutions at international level. Poor nations have become so dependent on capitalist nations that they cannot be self-sustaining development. This theory also observed that poor nations have destroyed or they have demolished their own structure. They have demolished their own structure of the poor nations, and the poor nations are in the condition that they cannot develop themselves without the linked with they think that they cannot be developed without linking or without the help of the capitalist nation or the developed nation. But actually, these theories also state that developing countries or poor nation cannot be developed unless they break their relation completely from the capitalist system or completely from the developed nations. All the benefits of this system are taken by capitalist nations. It says that in the import-export system or in the globalization system, the maximum benefits are taken by the developing countries. Or in these days we can say that the Western Europe or the American nations or the America or Canada, these are the developed nations. All the benefits of system or the world trade system is working in that way or developing in that way that that nations are more beneficial in the trade with the poor nations. Without breaking their relations from capitalist nations, developing nation cannot be developed. So is the suggestion of this theory that a poor nation should break their relations from the capitalist nations or the developed nations. The Kwame Nkrumah, now we will discuss the many theorists which developed the dependency theory. First was Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah was from Ghana. He was the president or prime minister of Ghana. He developed the concept of neocolonialism. His book is famous, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. The Lenin book was the Imperialism, the Last Stage of Capitalism. It means capitalism developed into imperialism, and the imperialism developed into neocolonialism. It means the colonial period, that when the poor nations were the colonies of the imperialist nation, and they were exploited and they were dominated or they were ruled by that nations. For example, India was the colony of Britain, and the Britain ruled over India for 200 years, and he exploited all the resources, and he ruled the Indian for many years. So the neocolonialism is a different stage. Now the developing nations or the poor nations of Asia, Africa and Latin America are legally sovereign nations, are legally independent nations. They are not under the control of any other imperialist nations. But even though they are dependent so much on the imperialist nation or the developed nation or powerful nations, that their economy or even their political system is indirectly controlled by that nations. This is the new form of colonialism, which was called by Kwame Nkrumah as neocolonialism, and he also says that it is the worst form of imperialism, because power without responsibility. Because in the colonialism or in the imperialism, if they were exploited, if the capitalist nation exploit the poor nation, but even that they were responsible for the progress or for the exploitation. But in the neocolonialism, they use the power without any responsibility. They use the power, but they have no responsibility, and exploitation without redress. They exploit, but they did not provide any help. But in the imperialism, if they were exploited, they also developed, they also take some step for development also. For example, in India, British government developed the railway or the communication system or many other system also. But in neocolonialism, they exploit without redress. So Kwame Nkrumah called the neocolonialism as the worst form of imperialism. Kwame Nkrumah also says that we rely upon the former imperial power, that poor nations are so dependent on the former imperial power for defense and even internal security. He produced his idea on the basis of his study in Malaysia, because Malaysia was the colony of Britain, and after independent also he was so highly dependent on Britain, even including the defense or even internal security, that it is the new form of colonialism that he called the neocolonialism. Many former colonies are still essentially satellite of the great powers and other rich countries. These colonies are legally, formally independent country, but they are a satellite of the great powers. They revolve around that powers, and indirectly great powers exploited their resources and controlled their political decisions also in international relations. Rich country benefit both from buying and selling. They are benefited both-sided. They sell their thorough export, in which they gain more benefit, and even in import they also benefit. So in the both ways they are benefiting. They are in the condition of gain in the selling or in buying system. So Kwame Nkrumah developed the new concept of neo-colonialism. Now, the other theorist of dependence theory is Andre Gunder Frank. His book was Capitalism and the Underdevelopment Latin America. The Kwame Nkrumah theory was based on the study of Malaysia, and Andre Gunder Frank, the study based on the system in Latin America, which are the South American nations, which were also included in the category of developing nations like Asia and Africa. Single integrated economic system, he says that This system is the single integrated economic system has been developed at world level, which he called the capitalist system. And he developed the theory of center peripheral. It is the center or it is the peripheral state, and all the benefits are taken by the center. He put in the center the rich country, the powerful country, or the capitalist or the developed country, and in periphery stage, these are the poor nations or the underdeveloped nations or developing nations, which are economically or technologically dependent on the center. Or all the system is developed in such a way the center is become more powerful or more beneficial, and this peripheral state has become more weak. They work in the strength, they work in the benefit of the center. The system is work in the benefit of the center. This is the center periphery theory, which was developed by Andre Gunder Frank. Center alone reap all the benefits of the development. If in the globalization system or in the export-import system, the benefits, if there is a development, but the benefits, all the benefits are taken by the center or taken by the rich nations or the developed nations. Without delinking from the capitalism and the center, capitalism from center, poor nation cannot be developed. It means he suggests that without delinking from the capitalism or from center, capitalism from center, poor nation cannot be developed. So poor nation, if they want to, although it is propagated by the poor or the developed nation that globalization is beneficial for all, and only through the globalization poor nation can be developed. But this is a wrong assumption which says by Andre Gunder Frank, without delinking from the capitalism or from the center, poor nation cannot be developed. Now the Samir Amin, which his study is based on African states, accumulation on the world order, a critic of the theory of underdevelopment, is the basic book, in the famous book, in which book Samir Amin also says that capitalism left no space for the development of the means of production in the so-called underdevelopment region. So they are become so dependent on the developed nation that they cannot own develop themselves. Developing countries are no longer capable of autonomous self-sustainable growth. Now they are not capable that they can be develop their own resources or they can be develop themselves. Center, it means the developed nation or the rich nations distort the structure of developing nation to make them unsuitable for self-sustaining development. They have become so too developed, so dependent on that system or the poor nations that their own structure is not developed in such a way that they can develop themselves autonomously. This theory of Samir Amin study was based on the African nations. Wallerstein Emmanuel, his idea is also related to this theory, center, periphery and semi-periphery. This is center, this is periphery, semi-periphery, this is periphery. Some nations are between the center and periphery, which have some features of the center, yani ki means developed nations, or some features are like the developing nations. Modern is theory, Wallerstein Emmanuel theory is called the world system theory. The modern world system, in which capitalist in this book is Capitalist Agriculture and the Origin of the European World Economy in the 16th Century, and the other famous book is Capitalist World Economy, when he wrote in 1979. He also provided the theory of core, periphery and semi-periphery, which is also developed by Andre Gunder Frank or Samir Amin also. The third word constitutes the periphery. At the periphery state, there are the third world country which has been providing raw material, which provide the raw material to the center or to the developed country, such as minerals and timbers, to support the course order. Historically, the rich industrial region constitute the core. The rich nations are palace at their state. The poor nation provide raw material and import the ready material or the ready material. This is the through this system, the export or import, the import raw material, the export ready material, the rich nation or the which nation are in the center or which are the developed nations are beneficial, more beneficial, and through this system they exploit the poor nations. The core exploit the periphery, as Wallerstein says, the core exploit the periphery in accumulated wealth that help the core region to build their industrial infrastructure. Semi-periphery, in the semi-periphery, it involved a mix of production activity, some associated with the core areas and some associated with the peripheral areas. Antonio Gramsci provide the theory of hegemony and the critical theory of international relation, which was developed by Robert Cox, is based on the idea of Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was Italian Marxist. The word hegemony is derived from the hegemonia, means lender. Cannot the predominant position of the most powerful state in the international system, dominant dependent picture of relationship between the hegemon and the states that under his hegemony. Basically, Antonio Gramsci developed the idea that not only coercive means the system is sustained, the capitalist system is sustained, but it is sustained by non-coercive means, such as develop the hegemony, such as popularize their idea in the developing nations or in the poor society or proletariat society. Through the culture, through the education, they propagate their ideas in such a way that they receive the consent of the proletariat, that the capitalist system is in the favor of proletariat also. So through culture, through education, or through other non-coercive means, which may be sport or which may be other activity, the ideas of capitalism is we can say it a mind wash of the proletariat class to propagate their own ideas to the proletariat class or to the poor class or to the lower class. And like this way, the rich nations or the powerful nations also propagate the ideas of globalization, propagate the idea of free trade, or propagate the idea of capitalism in the mind of poor nations, that they think that it is beneficial for them also, but it is not beneficial, but it is based on exploitation. So Antonio Gramsci, the Gramsci hegemony refer to the ability of a dominant class to exercise power by the winning the consent of those is in subjugated as an alternate to use the coercion. They did not use the coercive power, but they use the consent power. It means they propagate this is their ability. He puts emphasis on the non-coercive form of the class rule, because through the means of non-coercive methods, they can sustain for long. The capitalist system or the exploitation can sustain for long, because who are exploited think themselves that they are not exploited. The system is not based on exploitation. In case of the developed West, the system was maintained not merely for coercion, but perhaps more importantly through consent. So they developed the idea of globalization, developed the idea of free trade market is become so popular that we and that the poor nations which are not beneficial in the free trade market also consider that it is a just idea, or it is in the favor of that nations. Critical theory, the Robert Koch's theory of Robert Koch is based on the idea of Antonio Gramsci. The ideas of Antonio Gramsci, or the theory of hegemony of Gramsci, was applicable at national level, at the society or social level. How a government maintains themselves, or how the capitalist ideas are popularized in the society. At international level, the hegemony theory or the idea of Gramsci was applicable by Robert Koch, and his theory is also called the critical theory, because critical theory was also developed from the Frankfurt School at national level also. Hegemony, Robert Koch says that the hegemony is perhaps an important for maintaining stability and continuity at the international level as it is at the domestic level. It says that hegemony theory is not applicable at national level, but is also important, or also explain the system at international level also. Dominant power in the international system are shaped a world order. They developed or they shaped the world order in that way that they can maintain their hegemony, or they can maintain their dominance with the consent of poor nations. And that suits their interest, and have done so not only as a result of their coercive capability, because through coercive capability their dominance cannot be sustained for long. So they discovered the method of consent, or to maintain their hegemony at international level. For example, Koch said that hegemonic idea of free trade is so widely accepted today, the idea of free trade, that the word that it has almost become part of the common sense. It has become the power of the common sense that all nations which are very poor nations also think that the free trade is a good idea. Only through the free trade, or only through the globalization they can be developed. This has been a common sense even among the poor nations. The international system clashes not because of the anarchical structure, but because of the class conflict. In the realist theory, which mainly explain the anarchical structure, and which also claim that it is the anarchical system, because of the anarchical system or the absence of supreme authority, there are the clashes between nations to maintain their national interest. But this theory reject that idea, and it says that it is the class conflict. It is the class conflict between the rich nations and poor nations. Their interests are contradictory. Their interests are not. Their interests are clashes, because on one side is poor or developed nation, and other side are the developing nation. Their interest clashes. There is a class conflict, and due to this class conflict, there are this system is there are clashes between nations. International system is highly stratified and dominated by international capitalist system. It is stratified in the stratification. The powerful nations or the capitalist nations are at the top, and the poor and developing nations are at the bottom. This theory is criticized on many bases. First, it analyzes the world or international system at economic terms, but non-economic terms are also important, and it does not focus on the non-economic terms. For example, the national power or ideological differences. It avoids the systems, or avoid many of other factors which influence the international politics. Underemphasize the subjective, it is a subjective interpretation and preferences of individual and engaging with the social world. It is a subjective interpretation which cannot be scientific. Overemphasize on the class as a category for analyzing the event of world history. It overemphasized because Marx theory is based on the class. There are only two classes in the society, bourgeoisie and proletariat class, but there are other classes also exist, or at international level there are also many categories. Nations can be categorized in many categories. So but this theory overemphasized on the class as a category, which is not completely applicable in the international relation. Unscientific in their methodology, it not adopt the scientific method to come to the conclusion, so it is also criticized for not scientific or unscientific. And avoid cooperation among human behavior. It is also like a international, like real story which see the clash between the nations on the basis of national interest or because of the anarchical structure of international relations. This theory is also basis, it is also see the conflict among nations, developing nations and developed nation, or poor or rich nations, but there is also cooperation among the nation on many issues. For example, environment issues or the terrorism. There are many issues where they are cooperating with each other, but this theory overlook this cooperative factor. So this is also criticized on the this basis. So this theory, the Marxist approach, provide us new dimension of thinking or new way of analyzing the world system, which was not provided by other theories, for example realist or idealist theory. So this theory also discover some exploitative nature of this system or the exploitation, or also suggest to change this system. So this theory is also very important for us to analyze the existing international system. So this is the approaches of international system. Now we will discuss in the next classes the other aspect of international relations.